Hello to all you hoop heads and to the people who generally pop into college basketball around March. I'm Mike DeCourcy, college basketball columnist for the Sporting News, and this is my second annual trip through the entire NCAA tournament bracket. We're going to go one pick at a time, region by region, and then discuss the Final Four. Let's start in the West. Let's talk about Gonzaga. They have a very gifted freshman center/forward named Chet Holmgren, whom I can say without any qualification is the thinnest great player I have ever seen in college basketball. Now, does that cause problems for him at times? People putting bodies on him? Sure. But he's so dynamic. He's so gifted with the basketball. He's a tremendous shooter, a terrific ball handler. He handles the ball like a 6'1" guard, shoots it like a 6'4" shooting guard. When they start the NCAA tournament, they're going to start with the number 16 seed, Georgia State. That should not be a problem for the Zags. Boise State plays Memphis. That's a hard one to pick because Memphis is so talented. They've got in Jalen Duren, a freshman center, the kind of player who could cause problems for Gonzaga if they're able to survive the discipline challenge, defensive challenge that Boise State will present. I did not like what I saw from the Tigers in the American Championship game. The pressure was on them for a first time in a while. Real pressure. There was something there to be attained. Obviously, in the NCAA tournament, the advancement is something to be attained. The Tigers turned the basketball over too many times. I don't trust them much. So I went with Boise State to win that game where they'll play Gonzaga in the second round. Uconn is a team that I really like a lot, but I can't love because they don't have a great idea of who they want to score points. It's too situational for me to advance Uconn too far in this tournament. But I think they have a good group. I believe they'll win their first game against New Mexico State, but it's a terrific challenge. New Mexico State has done well in this tournament in the past. 2019, they were basically one decision away from winning their first round game against Auburn. I believe that year, Auburn was a 5 seed, just like Uconn is. New Mexico State was a 12 seed, just like they are now. They had the chance to win the game. I'm sorry. They had the chance to tie the game on their final possession. One of their guards drove the left side of the lane, had an open layup, but rather than tie the game, he saw an open shooter on the right wing, decided to whip a ball out there to try to win it in that moment rather than take the tie. I think they would have tied the game if he'd taken the lefty layup. Instead, he shoots it out to the wing, and the player who took that shot didn't make it, and that was it for New Mexico State, and Auburn wound up in the Final Four. So it's going to be a tough challenge for Uconn, but I have them going on there. Arkansas plays Vermont. Vermont is a tremendous mid-major, low-major basketball team. They are outstanding. John Becker, their coach, has done an amazing job with the Vermont program, and they will be a real challenge for Arkansas. But I trust Jalen Williams and J.D. Notae of Arkansas to get them through that game. They can heat things up with a little bit of defensive pressure. They certainly have the ability to make threes with the Mude, their shooting guard. I think they have a chance to do really well in that game and move on, even though Vermont's so good. Alabama may be the most difficult team to trust in this tournament. They have beaten teams as gifted as Gonzaga, and they've lost to teams that shouldn't have been on the floor with them. You just don't know what you're going to get when you're taking as many threes as they are. And it always feels to me when I watch Alabama like it doesn't necessarily matter the quality of the shot. I think they try to work to the best possible shot, but on most occasions. But there are times when you feel like if they're open, they'll shoot it regardless of where open means. It could be in the vicinity of the half-court line. They'll still shoot it. And I think that causes some problems for them in terms of the ability to be consistent. But they will beat whichever team comes out of the first four matchup between Rutgers and Notre Dame. I think it's Notre Dame. I think Notre Dame is actually a better matchup for Alabama with the way the Tide play. Notre Dame has a more substantial offense than Rutgers does, and it will be hard to play against Rutgers because Rutgers plays such great defense. But I think Rutgers will have a difficult time putting up enough points to try to take down the Fighting Irish, and that it will be like an old school 70s football matchup between Alabama and Notre Dame, but Alabama will prevail, unlike the 1973-74 Sugar Bowl when the Irish won. Texas Tech and Montana State. Montana State, fine program out of the Big Sky, but Texas Tech is the most proficient defensive team in college basketball. I call them the best pound for pound defensive team we've seen in a while. And the reason I say it that way is that Texas Tech does not have an elite Dikembe Mutombo type shot blocker. They're just always in the right position at the right time to make it hard for you to play. So no fun for Montana State and no win either. Texas Tech moves along. Michigan State and Davidson, an interesting matchup, in part because Davidson's point guard, who's had a tremendously successful year, second team All-Atlantic 10, Foster Loyer, was a Spartan until 12 months ago when he had played 3 years with Michigan State and just struggled to get a foothold in the Big Ten. I think the level of athlete in the Big Ten was just a little bit beyond Foster's reach. And it's shown in the Atlantic 10, he's been magnificent. And he was a tremendous high school basketball player. And Michigan State took him, and they tried to make it work last season for him to be their primary point guard, but he struggled defensively, struggled with the size of the opposition. And Davidson is just right for him because Davidson, their offense is so beautifully intricate, designed by Bob McKillop. Players are always moving, always in motion, and always with purpose. And it's worked out great for Foster. Now he gets to play against his old coach, Tom Izzo, in that offense that he's now a big part of. So it's going to be fun. I have Michigan State moving on, but Davidson is a wonderful team. Would not surprise me at all if they're able to pull that off, especially because if they get a lead, it's hard to take it away from them. They did give one up in the Richmond game, in the Atlantic 10 championship game. They made a couple of tough decisions and had a couple of bad breaks. That an air ball went right through the hands of one of Davidson's players, and if they'd gotten that rebound, they would have won the game probably. And unfortunately, it because it didn't catch rim, he wasn't quite ready to field it. And Richmond ended up winning the game and knocking Texas A&M, or in the words of the committee, Dayton, but still hard to believe that Dayton was the last team that was excluded. It was for most of us, it would have been Texas A&M. So that's and then the last matchup in the final grouping is the commencement of Mike Krzyzewski's final NCAA tournament against Cal State Fullerton. No problem moving along for the Blue Devils there. Gonzaga against Boise State. It happens that Boise State's head coach, Leon Rice, was a part of Mark Few's staff for a very long time. He's built a terrific program at Boise State, Leon has, and just not terrific enough to beat this Gonzaga team. He'll know the Gonzaga approach, but he's never faced a Gonzaga that included a player like Chet Holmgren, as I mentioned. So the Zags will move along out of that game. Uconn and Arkansas, really challenging game to select. Could go either way. Both teams are very fine basketball teams. That's why they're among the top 20 seeds in this tournament. I have Arkansas because I trust I like to have a guy like a J.D. Notae. And I guess if he had a bad day or UConn made him have a bad day, that would be an easier way for Arkansas to leave than in the UConn situation. If Martin has a bad day, they have other players that they can rely upon. The problem is that they always seem to be relying on someone different. And when you get into this tournament, it's really a good thing to have a definite idea of where you want your offense to go. Now, UConn certainly wants to play through the middle with Adama Sanogo, their terrific offensive center, but you're going to need some perimeter offense. And is Tyrese Martin going to have a great day? He's had some great days, and he's also had some not great days. And when you have to pick in advance, I'd say that Arkansas a little bit more dependable with where they want the ball to flow. They do some great ball screen stuff with Jalen Williams, their center, and Notae, who I mentioned before. So I think Arkansas prevails. Alabama against Texas Tech. For me, this is a perfect matchup for Texas Tech. They'll play that great defense. They'll allow Alabama to do some of the more fanciful things they want to do with their offense, but Texas Tech will always be right where they need to be. They'll score enough points against Alabama's defense to win. I see Texas Tech in the Sweet 16 again in the first year under Coach Mark Adams, who's done a wonderful job of continuing the success that Chris Beard built before he moved on to Texas. Duke and Michigan State. Duke is basically a better version of Michigan State. Better players who are fairly inconsistent, whereas Michigan State has very good players, but the same level of inconsistency. I would go with the better players in that circumstance, and that's Duke. Duke is loaded with talent. They're very young, but they have 4 or 5 players who will be first-round picks, and I think the talent wins there. Zags versus Arkansas. Now you're starting to get into an area where that reliability of Jalen Williams and J.D. Note, it starts to get met with the reliability of Drew Timme, the reliability of Holmgren, who I mentioned before. And I think that Gonzaga prevails there. Texas Tech against Duke, what a fascinating matchup that will be if it occurs. If I'm right and they play one another, because Texas Tech, again, not super talented, but super tight. They are the team that Mike Krzyzewski wants this group to be. Mike Krzyzewski has this thing, he's always used it as a metaphor for how to be successful as a team, and that is a fist. A fist has power because it's together. This open hand has less power because it's separated. That's been the metaphor that's defined his career as a head coach, and it's worked for Duke so many times in the past. They've had trouble getting that fist together in this particular season. So I think Texas Tech can win this game, and that's what I picked on my bracket for that reason. That inability or periodic inability of Duke to get together and be that group that plays in tandem and plays together in the way that Mike Krzyzewski has made so many teams play in the past. I think that's what gets Texas Tech to the Elite Eight, where they'll play Gonzaga in a rematch of an Elite Eight game that happened in 2019, and Texas Tech prevailed. Gonzaga against Texas Tech, again, a little bit different this time around. Texas Tech had more talent that year. Gonzaga has more talent this year. So I think the Zags will prevail because of that. Holmgren is a challenge for that defense to deal with because he can do things you can't take away. You can maybe take the ball away from him or keep it away from him. And I think that's a big key for Texas Tech. But once he gets it, his individual ability to hit deep threes that you can't challenge because he's 7 feet tall, to get by smaller defenders, even though he's so tall, I think that makes a difference in this game. And that's what moves Gonzaga on to their third Final Four in the last 5 years. A terrific season would be capped off by another opportunity for Gonzaga to win the national championship. We're going to move now to the East region, which is on the same side of the draw as the Gonzaga West region is. And it starts at the top with Baylor, the reigning national champion, but not at all similar to last year's champion. I mean, they're the same group. They're the same coaches. They have the same philosophy, the same culture. But that team was much older, much more experienced. Jared Butler at the shooting guard had been a star for multiple years. Davion Mitchell, the demonically defensive point guard that really was the key to the national championship last year, his ability to destroy opposing guards. They aren't like that this year. They still can play good defense at times, but not the destructive level that they did last year, and especially not subsequent to the injury to Jonathan Tchamwa-Tchatchoua, their terrific defensive center who's now absent with a knee injury and will not play in this tournament. So it's a different Baylor team. They rely very heavily on freshmen. Kendall Brown on the wing, Jeremy Sohan playing basically as a power forward, although he's a very mobile player who can cover a lot of ground, a lot of positions on the floor. Those guys are key players for them. The point guard, James Akinjo, who's had a very fine season, is a transfer from Arizona in his first year with the Bears. Adam Flagler, who was a key reserve last year, now a starter. LJ Cryer, who's been in the program, has been unavailable for most of the last couple of months, hasn't played a ton because of injury. What his status will be for this tournament, not sure, but it will ultimately impact how I view this team. So they're going to win their first game against Norfolk State, a wonderful MEAC program led by Robert Jones, the most underrated coach in college basketball. It should get the opportunity to coach at a higher level, but has not been presented that opportunity. I wrote about that in an article last summer about not enough programs outside in other conferences are considering coaches from the HBCUs. Robert Jones is a guy who deserves a shot to coach at a higher level. He's a terrific coach, has built a wonderful program at Norfolk State. And if he were playing as a 15 seed, there are 2 seeds in this tournament that Norfolk State could have beaten. I doubt that they can reach Baylor's level, but they're going to give it their best shot at Norfolk State. Wonderful program. North Carolina and Marquette in the 8-9 matchup. Marquette has struggled lately. They have not been able to reach the level that they did in mid-January, right around mid-January, when on my projected brackets, they were weighing in as a 4 or 5 seed. They fall to an 8-9 game by the end of the year. Carolina is going the opposite direction, has played much better of late. Many people saw the great Duke game that ended the regular season. That would be a game that if North Carolina can match that, they can certainly take care of Marquette. And that they're going to have to aspire to that, because if they can reach that level of ferocity and efficiency, they've got a chance to win a couple of games in this deal. In the next matchup, we're talking about St. Mary's and the winner between Wyoming and Indiana. I suspect Indiana will defeat Wyoming in the first 4, and that it will be Indiana against St. Mary's. And I believe that Indiana has the ability to win that game. St. Mary's is the 5 seed. Indiana will come in as a 12. But Trace Jackson Davis in the Big Ten tournament played like a player who did not want his season to be over. He wanted to have more games in March. Well, the only way to do that now is to keep winning. If he continues to play as he has, I think he has a great chance to at least get to the second round. UCLA has made the Final Four a year ago. They opened against Akron. Akron, a very fine mid-major team in the Mid-American Conference, had to come out of a really difficult bunched top in the Mid-American Conference. Had to beat Kent State in the final. Had to beat Ohio U in the semis. Kent State, Ohio U, Toledo, and Akron were all really strong teams in the MAC. And Akron, John Gross, who's been in this event before at both Illinois and Ohio U, is back with Akron for the first time. But I don't think that they will stick around long. The Bruins are too strong and too deep and too talented for Akron to likely pull off the upset. Virginia Tech and Texas. It's my first upset of this bracket. Texas has been a very strong physical team, good depth in the front court, good depth on the perimeter, but not very consistent. I think that Virginia Tech, not trying to fall in love with the momentum that they established by beating Carolina and Duke in the ACC tournament to win the ACC tournament and actually get in this field. They wouldn't have been in without that tournament championship. And so I'm not falling in love with that, but I do think that the way they play can bother Texas. The one question, can Storm Murphy, who's not a big player for a point guard, he's a smallish player, can he deal with the size and the dynamism of a Marcus Carr? I suspect that he'll hang in there. He's done it before. He was with Wofford in 2019 when they gave Kentucky a 2-seeded Kentucky team all it could handle. And so I think that Virginia Tech can advance in that game, where they will play the winner of Purdue and Yale. And Purdue, Purdue is not the best defensive team, to say the least, in this tournament. They are rated number 100 in defensive efficiency by Ken Pomeroy, his terrific statistical site. They just have not been able to be successful at stopping the basketball. And I don't think that'll be a super big problem in this one. I think they can take care of Yale, but it may crop up later on. Murray State, which earned a number 7 seed by absolutely dominating the Ohio Valley Conference. They opened the tournament against San Francisco. San Francisco was one of the teams out of the West Coast Conference, the third team to make it, along with Gonzaga and St. Mary's. They're a very well-coached team, a program that has been on the rise. Murray State, just a terrific season, only lost a couple of games, beat Memphis on the road, a big win for Murray State, dominated their conference. And so I think that Murray State's on the right path to winning at least a game in this deal. San Francisco, the one thing about them is that although they were very successful, they did not win a ton of their biggest games. And Murray may not be the most talented team they've played because they did play Gonzaga, but I think that might be the differentiator there. Murray State's used to winning, and San Francisco's just the type of team that they're used to beating. I don't think this is a level up from teams that Murray State's been able to conquer, so I think they can take care of this. And then finally, Kentucky against St. Peter's in the 2:15 matchup. That's a game that Kentucky should win, will win, probably not even worth another sentence. They're going to be involved in the second round. From there, we go to Baylor and North Carolina. And Baylor is a team that, again, we said, struggling a little bit with the identity of their defense, but they do have that elite guard play. Carolina is capable. We know they can beat teams at the top of this bracket because of that win over Duke, at Duke. But I think that Baylor has the right mix to deal with what Carolina has to offer. I think they can do a better job of keeping the ball out of the lane than Duke did that night. I think they'll identify shooters better than Duke did that night. We saw Carolina fall to Virginia Tech. I don't think that they're an automatic to continue just because their name is Carolina. That'll come back at some point, but the roster has to be better than it's been so far, or been lately, I should say. They'll be back to being Carolina soon, but in this occasion, they'll be leaving the tournament after the second round. Indiana against UCLA. How about that? 3 blue blood names within that one little corner of the bracket. Indiana, as I mentioned before, Trace Jackson Davis playing so well, but there's not enough weapons to handle UCLA. UCLA is solid at all 5 positions. They can handle the wing play that Indiana lacks. They can take advantage of that, the Bruins can. And I think that's why the Bruins move on to Sweet 16, where they'll face Baylor. Virginia Tech and Purdue, there are things, as I mentioned, that are not trustworthy about Purdue. That defense, problematic. But the big guy tandem, this 7'4" center Zach Edey, 6'10" center Trayvon Williams, they play those guys basically half the game each, so they stay fresh. They have 10 fouls to spend. They each do different things. I mean, Zach at 7'4" is so hard for teams to contend with. Trayvon Williams is the best passing big man in college basketball now, and probably the best I've seen in 25, 30 years. He may be the best passer going all the way back at that position to Bill Walton. The things he can do, he passes the basketball like a point guard, although not like a point guard in 2022 because there are so few good ones, but like a point guard in maybe 2009 when Ty Lawson was around, or 1992 when Bobby Hurley was around. I mean, you have to go back to some really terrific point guards, or 2005 when we had Chris Paul. I mean, that's the level of creativity that Trayvon Williams shows with his passing. So they'll take out Virginia Tech in the second round and move on to the Sweet 16. Murray State against Kentucky. Now, you know, this game is a matchup that Murray State players, the biggest problem with this matchup initially for Murray State will be making sure that they don't take their eye off of beating San Francisco, knowing that Kentucky awaits. Murray is a small town in the western part of the state of Kentucky. They dream about the opportunity to play the big team in the state. I think Kentucky has too much for them, but I think it'll be a very entertaining game. I mentioned that Wofford game in 2019. Kentucky advanced, but Wofford really played them well and was right there until the final 5 minutes or so. I suspect it'll be a little bit like that if this game happens. If I'm right and this game happens, I think it'll be a little bit like that, but that Kentucky prevails. Baylor against UCLA. This is where my worry about Baylor's circumstance creeps up, because UCLA has been a very consistent program pretty much all year, but especially over the last 2-3 weeks. They got a little fractured in their Pac-12 championship game against Arizona. Too much one-on-one, too much one-on-one by the not right player for the day. Jaime Jaquez has been a fabulous player this season, but on that day he struggled a little, but he kept forcing the issue. While Johnny Juzang, who'd been in a little bit of a slump, fought his way out of it in the first half, but then didn't get much access to the ball in the second. So they have to be more aware situationally than they were on that night. Maybe that was a rare night for them. Arizona has been kind of one of those teams that this UCLA team really wanted to conquer, and they couldn't quite get there. So they maybe got a little frustrated, but they can't afford that in this tournament. They have to stick with their formula, their flow, making sure that they get high-quality shots, because a lot of their high-quality shots are not three-pointers. A lot of them are two-point shots that come off their actions, that come off the ability of Juzang and Jaquez to create their own shots. After a few ball reversals, that sort of thing, you get the defense out of balance, and then you attack. That's what was missing from that second half against Arizona. Can't afford that, but I don't think that'll happen, and I think UCLA moves on to the Elite Eight. Baylor goes home after a wonderful season as reigning champions. Purdue playing Kentucky. Now, I'll be frank, when I picked this game, the first thing I thought of was how important Oscar Tshiebwe is to Kentucky and how he drives everything they do, and how having Edey and Williams, who I mentioned before, that center tandem, gives you two guys to deal with Oscar, and not instead of just one. And that helps a lot because, one, you can spend some extra fouls, and Oscar's not a great free throw shooter, and you can wear him down physically a little bit because you have two big bodies to put against him. And so I thought that would be an advantage. What I didn't really think enough about was the fact that Kentucky's guards, Xavier Wheeler and Ty Washington, it's the best guard tandem in college basketball, and the absolute best at driving the basketball into the lane. In Ty Washington's case, he more often will drive it to about the 12-foot mark and take a shot than necessarily create a lot of opportunities for his teammates. He's not selfish. If he sees something that's better than him taking a 12-foot shot, he'll go to that. But he also understands there's not much in the game better than him taking a 12-foot shot. He is phenomenal on that play. Xavier Wheeler, terrific at getting the ball all the way to the rim. If he were 6'5", he'd already be in the NBA because he's so good at getting the ball to the rim. Unfortunately, he's 5'9", so here he is. And sometimes that gets him into a little trouble when he gets deep. That could be a problem when you're facing someone like Edey, who's so big. But he has been at times better, most of the time better, at attacking and not trying to force the ball to the rim when he's outmatched physically by a defender who's already there. So that's the worry that I have about this pick. I'm going with Purdue, as you can probably guess, but I worry about that. Purdue's defense, the inability to stop the ball, couldn't keep Fats Russell from Maryland out of the lane in the final weeks of the regular season, struggled with that a lot, and they're going to face that from two sides. I really worry about that, but I made the pick of Purdue based on that center matchup, and I'm going to stick with it. Obviously, you have to have integrity in this business as a journalist, so I'm going to stick with that, even though I have some reservations of that. I want to introduce those reservations to you so you can consider them for yourself. UCLA against Purdue in the final eight. That's a very difficult game to call, but again, I thought that the dynamism of the center tandem that they have is problematic for UCLA. UCLA does have two centers. They do. But I think it's a lesser tandem than what Purdue puts out there. And there's no one on UCLA who's quite like Jaden Ivey. I have not mentioned Jaden Ivey, the most dynamic player in college basketball. When he is drafted this June, probably within the first 5 picks, he will walk across the stage and he will shake Adam Silver's hands. And at that moment, he will become one of the top 3 most dynamic players in the NBA before the ball even gets bounced. He's that special as a talent. A lot of people are using Ja Morant as the comparison for Jaden Ivey. It's the wrong comparison. First of all, Ja Morant came out of college as a ready-made point guard. That's not Jaden. He has played a lot with the ball in his hands and has done a lot of the creating of offense for Purdue, but he's more a natural wing with creative possibilities. And Ja is also physically more powerful, built bigger than Jaden. Jaden's more of a lean player. The player that they should be talking about is Russell Westbrook, and I don't know how everybody misses that. I mean, I know Russ is older now, and that people's frame of reference are maybe not that broad, but Russ is still in the league, man. He's still the memories of Russ playing above everybody and well above the floor are very fresh, and that's what you're getting with Jaden Ivey, without a doubt. So A player like that in a game like this, I think he can be the difference maker. I don't think Purdue can win a game at the Final Four level because of the defense, but flawed teams can make the Final Four. We see it all the time. They have to cover for something. Offense, in the case of Texas Tech 2019, this time it's going to be defense with Purdue. On the opposite side of the bracket, the South region, the number one overall seed, Arizona. I call them not the most trustworthy team in this tournament, but the least untrustworthy team. They are somewhat flawed. They are not a perfect team, but they have been really consistent. They have a terrific guard in Benedict Mathurin, the kind of NBA talent you have to win this championship. That's one thing people don't talk enough about. I think it's been more prevalent in the last few years, but I've been talking about it for 25 years. You have to have NBA level talent. And I'm not just talking about guys who are going to go and sit on the end of the bench. I'm talking about guys who get picked in the first round and that the teams have real plans for. If you don't have that player on your team, you're not winning the national championship. It hasn't happened since 1987 when Steve Alford was a second round pick and Dean Garrett was a second round pick for Indiana. That's the last time that we had a national champion that did not have a first round pick. 1987, it's a long time ago. I was around there. I was in the building that night when Indiana won that championship, but I was a much younger man. So Arizona has that player in Mathurin. They have a really powerful physical front court we'll get to later. So they win easily in their game against the winner between Wright State and Bryant, which I suspect will be Wright State. TCU against Seton Hall. This is a game of all the games, the 67 games that will be played in this tournament. This is the one in which all 10 players should be issued boxing gloves. This is a toughness game, both sides, tough physical teams. That's the calling card of both the Pirates from Seton Hall and the Horned Frogs of TCU. The difference for me between the two is point guard. Kadari Richmond has been playing much better of late for Seton Hall at that position, but still isn't 100% comfortable with being a full-time, every trip down the floor point guard. He didn't play a lot at Syracuse when he went there. He transferred here. He wound up with the job partly because he won it, partly because Bryce Aiken, their other option at that position, has not been playing because of injury. So it's all Kadari now. And he's played fine, but I like Mike Miles at TCU better. He's one of my favorite point guards in this tournament, was the key player, one of the key players. Chet Holmgren was on this team in the summer, the USA Under-19 national champion. Other than Kenneth Lofton Jr. from Louisiana Tech, who was so good in that tournament, who's not in this one, Mike Miles was the player on that team who made the biggest impact. And that includes Jaden Ivey, who I mentioned. That includes Johnny Davis of Wisconsin, who was a first-team All-American, and as I mentioned, Holmgren, who was a second-team All-American. Mike Miles made a bigger difference than all those guys in winning that gold medal at the World Cup. So I think he can win one game in this tournament based on his performance in other big games. UAB opens the tournament as a 12-seed playing 5-seed Houston. This is the first big upset that I'm willing to call. If you look at Houston at the beginning of the year, they had two terrific players in Jason Sasser and Tremont Mack, very fine players. They were two of the top 5 scorers on the Houston team, and they both were injured in December and lost for the year. And so they've had to cover for that. They've had to paper over that, so to speak. And they've been able to do that well enough to win the American Conference regular season championship, to win the American Conference tournament championship. Very successful with that. But in the American Conference, there were only 3 teams that were even in contention for this tournament field. Obviously, one of them was Houston. The second was Memphis. And the third was SMU, which was close to making this field, but didn't quite get invited. So out of those teams, they played Memphis 3 times and SMU twice. And they were under 500 in those games. They lost twice to Memphis before getting revenge in the conference tournament championship game, and they lost once and won once against SMU. So 2-3 against the only tournament quality teams that you faced in 2 months is not really inspiring. They weren't asked to be great many times in that league, and they weren't able to do it 60% of the time. So I don't feel good about them going far in this tournament. And that's a key when you're doing your bracket projections. If you're going to call an upset like UAB over Houston, be certain that that team's not going to hang around very long. And I suspect that with Illinois in the next game, that Houston won't do much damage in this tournament, even if they foul my upset pick. Illinois, beginning the tournament against Chattanooga. Illinois has not been consistent in the last couple of weeks, but they did win some huge games, including a season ender against Iowa that they needed to get a share of the Big Ten championship game. And the reason they got that was because of a point guard named Andre Curbelo, who was injured for much of this season. And that problem that was created by his absence was that they had to move on without him. They put Trent Frazier at their point guard, and he did a great job. And they got a lot of terrific shooting out of Alfonso Plummer, who moved into the lineup as a result of the injury to Curbelo. And they did a lot of good things. But there was a ceiling on that. They need someone who can open up a defense. They don't have that without Curbelo. Now, he is a very high-risk player. He takes a lot of chances, more chances than he can afford in a lot of circumstances, especially when Illinois is trying to protect narrow leads at the end of games. Has to take fewer chances. But if he's not out there, there aren't going to be many more chances to take. They're not going to last long in this tournament if he's not out there. As great as Kofi Cockburn, their 7-foot center, is at commanding the defense and taking them on and forcing defenses to throw multiple defenders at him, an incredible physical force. But if they don't have the ability to open up the defense and they're just, can you get Kofi the ball or make threes, it's just not varied enough, and you're not lasting. So we'll see how Curbelo matures in this week of practice and whether he understands the consequence of taking too many risks in this tournament. But they'll definitely, in my estimation, beat Chattanooga and move on to the second round. Colorado State and Michigan, not an easy matchup for Colorado State, the 6th seed, Michigan the 11th. Michigan has multiple NBA talents on their team. Caleb Houston, a freshman, a terrific outside shooter who can really get on a roll. Hunter Dickinson, who may not be an NBA player because he's going to have to defend on the perimeter, but he shoots on the perimeter. He can play inside, just absolutely terrific. And Musa Diabate, who will become a truly great player if he is one of those players that I would say stick around college basketball because he's a couple steps away. Don't just go to the NBA and sit on the bench for multiple years. Stick around college basketball, get great, which he will, and then go as one of the top picks in the draft. But Colorado State, really a very resilient, veteran-oriented team. David Roddy, the most underrated player in college basketball, 6'6", 240, plays a power game that you don't see much in college basketball anymore, but more so a power game complemented by the perimeter skill, the ability to shoot deep shots that you have to have in today's game. I think Colorado State can beat Michigan and move on to the next round, where they'll play Tennessee, which opens against a very fine low major team in Longwood that had a phenomenal year in their conference. And I think Tennessee, which has been the best team really in the last 3 weeks of college basketball, I think they move on from that game. Ohio State and Loyola, a lot of people are tempted by that Loyola name. They've seen it beat Illinois a year ago and move on to the Sweet 16. They've seen this Loyola name go to the Final Four. They've seen Sister Jean on the sideline. This is a little bit different Loyola team, still outstanding. Won the Missouri Valley Conference Tournament Championship after struggling down the final couple of weeks and losing the regular season to Northern Iowa. But this is a team that is not as gifted as the team that went to the Final Four, not as gifted as last year. And the key player missing from those two teams, Cameron Krutwig, who was one of the really super skilled big men in college basketball during his time. He finished his career at Loyola, so they don't have that weapon. But what version of Ohio State are they going to meet? I can't tell you. Kyle Young hasn't played of late because of injury. Is he going to be ready for this tournament? If he's ready, Ohio State will be fine in this game, will be able to advance. If he's not, all bets are off. It's a total coin flip at that point. I picked Ohio State in the belief that Young might be able to get back, but we'll see. As I said, if it's close to game time, if you don't trust that he'll be playing and you feel comfortable with Loyola, I'd say go ahead and do it. Villanova then against the 15 seed Delaware shouldn't have much trouble moving on to the second round. Going back to the top, you have Arizona against TCU. Again, least untrustworthy team, Arizona moves on. Illinois UAB, that upset that we enjoy in the first round often produces a less impressive second round game, and I think that's what happens here. I think Illinois advances. Colorado State and Tennessee. Tennessee right now playing too well. In a different bracket would have been an automatic Final Four team for me, but not in Arizona's bracket. That's, as I said, the one team that I feel comfortable trusting. So I'm going with Tennessee. Villanova, not a hard choice over Ohio State for me at this point. If Ohio State were as healthy as they were at the start of the year, I think Ohio State would, first of all, would not be in that game playing as a 7th seed, but they would definitely be right there playing nose to nose with Villanova. But I don't see that happening with their current circumstance. Arizona versus Illinois with Christian Coloco inside. I think they can guard Kofi Coburn. I think Illinois will struggle to guard Benedict Mathurin on the perimeter. They don't have a big wing like him, who is an outstanding proven defensive player. So I think Mathurin has a big game. Arizona moves on. Tennessee versus Villanova. Tennessee, the one big seeding mistake that the committee made, and as a result, they're playing Villanova. It might have been flipped, and they could have been 2-3 instead of 3-2, so this game might have happened anyway, and they still have to win it. I think Tennessee wins this game because of the ability of Kennedy Chandler to stand up to Colin Gillespie, the tremendous senior point guard, super senior point guard for Villanova. I think Tennessee makes Villanova struggle with their offense, with their ability to get open shots. They're so good at it, and they're so good at making them. I think Tennessee's perimeter defense holds up in that game as it did in earlier games against teams like Arkansas, and I think they move on. But I do think, again, as I said, Arizona just too much, and they move on to the Final Four in a victory over the Volunteers. Kansas, the number 1 seed in the Midwest region, and the region that seems as if it was designed by Bill Self. There's lots of reasons, and we'll get to them, but they start off with a game against the winner between Texas Southern and Texas A&M Corpus Christi, which I suspect will be Texas Southern, but I know that Texas Southern is not likely to be a huge challenge for the Kansas Jayhawks, and they move on. San Diego State against Creighton. Tough game to call. Most 8-9 games are. Does Creighton's offensive ability prevail, or the terrific defense that San Diego State plays? The Aztecs are somewhat like a 95-cent version of TCU, always in the right place, always together on defense, hard to play against. It'll be hard for Creighton to play against, and without their point guard, Ryan Nembhard, the brother of Gonzaga point guard Andrew Nembhard, he's been injured and out for the year, and so I think that San Diego State takes advantage of that. Iowa is going to be a team a lot of people pick because of how hot they looked when they were playing in the Big Ten tournament. Don't fall in love with momentum. Here's the lesson on that. Last 25 years, 12 teams have been champions after winning their conference tournaments, have gone on to win the Final Four national championship. So it's not that it never happens, but it also isn't a guarantee. That momentum that you think you see isn't always a guarantee of great success in the NCAAs. I do like this Iowa team, and I do think they can play in this thing for a while. And I do think they could be, if they were in Purdue's place or their bracket, I'd feel pretty confident. I'm much more confident in a lot of ways than I do about Purdue making the Final Four. But they happen to get stuck in a region where I think Kansas is a good matchup for them. And so Iowa will advance here, but eventually I think they're going to meet their end before they get to New Orleans. South Dakota State I have advancing in the next game in my second upset pick. In this case, the team that they will upset is Providence. The mentally toughest team in this tournament, have won so many close games, are not super talented. This is part of why I said that the bracket feels like it was designed by Bill Self, because of the fact that you're looking at a team that doesn't have great talent but has great achievement. You want to have talent in this tournament, and if you don't, it's really hard to overachieve 2, 3, 4, 6 times. It's just hard. It doesn't happen very often. It doesn't ever happen 6 times, but it's really hard for it to happen much more than 2. South Dakota State, one of the best offensive teams in college basketball. Somebody's going to be upset. Why not go with the team that is so often in the close games and maybe this time winds up on the wrong side of it? Hard to know what to do with LSU. Don't have their coach right now. The coach who got them here, Will Wade, was fired over the weekend in advance of the selection process. And so LSU is going to have to go with interim coach Kevin Nickelberry. I know Kevin very well. He does a really fine job, and he's got a lot of head coaching experience. Head coach at Howard, head coach at Hampton. So he's been a head coach for basically about 10 years in the past. So he knows what he's doing on the bench, but how will it be for them to be listening to so much of a different voice? They're going to move on in this game against Iowa State. Iowa State has sort of lost its rhythm and it just is really struggling right now and so perimeter oriented. And LSU is a terrific defensive team. I think they can hold Iowa State's offense down enough to get the victory. Wisconsin and Colgate. Colgate will be hard to play against for Wisconsin. Shoot the basketball really well. And Wisconsin, again, in that theme I was talking about, handpicked by Bill Self. Look, Johnny Davis is one of the best players in the country. He was nearly a unanimous All-American for Sporting News. So it's no picnic to play against Wisconsin. But they aren't as talented at the other 4 positions as some other teams in this tournament. Certainly at their station in the bracket, number 3 seed, they are the team with the least overall talent. So they're going to win their opening game against Colgate, but another team that I don't think that we could likely see in the Final Four. And then Auburn, another team that's kind of broken. Although they're a number 2 seed and they had a great year in the Southeastern Conference, it hurt them to not be challenged more, to face more Kentucky. They faced them one time at home. They faced a lesser competition in the SEC than most teams did in their conferences because of the way their schedule broke down. There's 14 teams in the SEC, can't play everybody twice. And so their challenges weren't as great. And I think that not having to meet as many challenges meant that when they did, they were a little less prepared and there was more pressure on those challenges. So they didn't win some of their tougher games down the stretch, lost at Arkansas, lost at Tennessee, and then lost again in the SEC championship tournament. So I think that's a problem for them right now. And their guard play is so erratic. You're looking at a group of players who just don't seem to be able to be consistent. Wendell Green, the terrific talent that they have, sort of a high-risk player like Andre Curbelo, but more of a shooter in that sense, takes some real risks with his shot selection, and that creates problems in the biggest game. So Auburn will win that game. How long they last seems dubious. Kansas against San Diego State. Again, Kansas has beaten the better San Diego State in Texas Tech. So as recently as the Big 12 championship game. So I think Kansas advances there. Iowa against South Dakota State. Again, that upset pick doesn't usually last long. So Iowa, which I mentioned, I really like their offense with Keegan Murray, one of the best players in the country. They have multiple other shooters. They've got more ability to move the basketball with Tony Perkins coming in off the bench. So I really like Iowa a lot. And anybody that wants to put them along to the Final Four, I wouldn't argue with it. It won't be my pick, but I think Iowa prevails in that game. LSU versus Wisconsin. This is where I think not having your coach first hurts you. A team that like Wisconsin that's hard to play against because they're very precise with their execution, especially on the offensive end. LSU certainly has more overall dynamism than Wisconsin does, but I think Wisconsin's precision wins that game. And then USC and Auburn. I think USC is a fine team, but it's a little bit too reliant on players like Boogie Ellis. If Boogie had even on a great day for him, which he did have in the Pac-12 championship game against UCLA, they don't really have enough to go with him. There's just not enough offense there to win a game against a team like Auburn, which defends the lane, even though their guards have been problematic on offense. The defense of Walker Kessler and Jabari Smith, there's no team that can match them with interior defense. They're by far the best in the country at that. So I think that Auburn will win that game, but USC could be a contender there. The round of 16, the Sweet 16, Kansas against Iowa, as I mentioned, either way could go. I like Iowa a lot, and and even the matchup I don't feel bad about. I think it's going to be as close as they come, but I went with Kansas because of their ability to go so many different ways with their attack. They rely a lot on Christian Brown and All-American Ochai Agbaji. They get a lot out of Jalen Wilson, but then they can mix and match their other two players to such a degree that you never really know what you're going to face. And they got the added boost of Remy Martin coming back from injury and playing really well in the Big 12 tournament. Remy has been another player, high risk, takes a lot of chances, can be tunnel visioned as a ball guard. But I think he'll contribute to their success in a game like Iowa. Wisconsin and Auburn, I don't know what to. I really don't. I went with Auburn because they have the size inside in the two players I mentioned. Jabari Smith can have a great offensive game, but can Wendell Green hold up to the consistency that you need to have to beat a team like Wisconsin? That's the biggest question in that game. I went with Auburn. Then I chose Kansas over Auburn, and it's kind of counterintuitive, I guess. I have to admit to say that Auburn's broken, but then put them in the Elite Eight. But I couldn't put all my trust in a Wisconsin team that if you take out Johnny Davis, and then you're reliant on interior offense off of really high level action. I mean, remember if Johnny Davis doesn't make 3-point shots, it's a team that doesn't have a lot of counters to that from the 3-point line. So they have to run their action to get inside again with Stephen Crowell, their center, or with Tyler Wall, their power forward. And at that point, there's Walker Kessler to block 6 or 7 shots. So I don't think the matchup is great. Maybe Greg Gard finds a way around that. We'll see. But I have Auburn in the Elite Eight. And then Kansas moving on to the Final Four for the reason I mentioned, that I don't trust Auburn at this point with their guard play. And I do think Kansas has a lot more offensive weapons. In the Final Four, if my Final Four is correct, then the first game of the semifinal will be Gonzaga versus Purdue. And this is where the inability to defend, or the struggle to defend that Purdue has had, it just becomes too much for them. And Gonzaga takes that game with all the offensive weapons they have. I mentioned Nembhard, Hunter Salas, great shooter. They've got so many different players that can hit from the perimeter. I think at that stage, all the gifts of Jaden Ivey and all the size and skill of Zach Edey and Trayvon Williams, it's just not enough to match the Zags. Arizona against Kansas, really interesting game if it happens because of that ability that Arizona has up front to negate a lot of what Kansas is able to get to the rim. I think Christian Brown becomes the key in that game. If Kansas wants to win that game, then Christian Brown has to forget about his tendency to want to share with others, so to speak. Make the right decision, sure. But too often the right decision is you're open, you're in the lane, take that 2-footer, take that 4-footer, take that 6-footer. And too often for him, it's, I know I'm going to try to kick it out and get a 3 or get a recycle of our offense. Doesn't always believe in himself and his ability, which he should. He's a gifted player and he will be an NBA player. But he doesn't always play with that belief. He runs away from some open shots on the perimeter as well. Not as much as he does when he gets the action going to the rim and he bails out on really good opportunities for lesser opportunities on the perimeter. But he also occasionally will pass up an open shot that has been designed for him. The action is get that guy open or get Ochai open on the other wing, whichever comes first. And when it comes to him, if it hasn't gone to Ochai first, sometimes he'll give it up thinking that there are better options. He has to understand if he's not option 1, he's not. Ochai is an All-American, but he is at least option 1B. And he's got to play like that if they're to have a chance. I still go with Arizona. For the reasons I mentioned, I trust them. They've got the best NBA talent on the floor if that game happens in Benedict Mathurin. They'll have superior shot blocking to lock down the rim with Christian Koloko. They'll have Tabelis to add muscle and some perimeter offensive skill to stretch Kansas's defense. I think Jalen Wilson will become very important in defending Tabelis, even though Tabelis is physically more powerful. But I think that Arizona prevails. And then we go to the national championship game. And this is where I talked about that flaw. Gonzaga versus Arizona, the flaw in Gonzaga. Well, Arizona has bodies to put on Drew Timme. Koloko is a terrific defensive player, not just at the rim, but up the lane as well, where Timme is so gifted at putting the ball on the floor from the high post and just completely undressing opposing offensive players. He's so good. Timme is so good at putting the ball on the floor at the top of the key or at the foul line and undressing opposing defensive players, getting the ball up on the rim and scoring. Koloko can take that away. And of course, Tubelis will have a difficult time matching up with Chet Holmgren. But I think that he can do a good enough job, especially with his physicality, to deal with the multiple threat that we see Chet Holmgren provide. But I think that Arizona prevails because of that ability to lock down the interior, to lock down the baseline, to make Gonzaga a more of a one-dimensional team, or at least a 1.5-dimensional team. Now, the difference between this season and the Baylor game a year ago is that last year you saw Gonzaga very dependent on a particular three-point shooter, one particular guy, easier to stop it in that case. Jalen Suggs, a tremendous offensive player at the point guard spot for Gonzaga. It just so happened Baylor had the best defensive point guard that we've seen in a while in Davion Mitchell. So some of the things that they weren't able to get going in that title game against Baylor, even with the physicality and the shot blocking that Arizona can provide inside, they won't be as effective at taking away the perimeter. So Gonzaga could come forward and make a lot of shots and win that game. It would be there will be a different chemistry in this title game, Gonzaga versus Arizona, than there was to Gonzaga versus Baylor. So it won't be a blowout. It won't be a game that was over in basically 2.5 minutes like last year's championship game was. I think this will be a very competitive game to the end, but I think the difference with Koloko and Mathurin pushes them past the Zags with Timme and Holmgren, and Arizona holds up the national championship trophy for the first time since 1997. It'll be exactly 25 years since Arizona held up that trophy with Miles Simon as the most outstanding player, with Michael Dickerson and Jason Terry, the great Jason Terry, coming off the bench. What a team that was. This is not as good a team as that was, I can tell you right now. But they are a terrific team, and they will be your national champions for 2022. And won't it be really cool that all will go down with a full crowd in New Orleans, in the Superdome, the way it was in 2012 with North Carolina, the way it was in '87, as I mentioned, the Indiana Hoosiers beating Syracuse, the way it was in 2003 with Syracuse winning and Carmelo having such a brilliant performance in the tournament, and especially on that day. It will be wonderful to have a real Final Four atmosphere again. We had a Final Four last year with Baylor winning, but it wasn't the same. This year, back to New Orleans, back to the site of so many great games. I left out Michael Jordan and his jump shot to beat Georgetown in '82. So many great title games in the Superdome, and we're going to have another. My pick, Gonzaga versus Arizona, with Arizona leaving as champion. Thanks for listening, for sharing your time to look at my picks with me. Enjoy March the way I will, the way millions of Americans will. If you're new to the game this year, again, we're so happy to have you. If you're one of those people who's been reading me all year long, I'm even happier. Thanks for watching.